Hey tabletop gamers, this is Ben here from everybitcountz. Tonight I'm going to be doing a painting tutorial of my new Necron Night Scythe. This is my first time actually painting any of these models up, Night Scythe or Doom Scythe, but overall I was actually pretty happy with the way it came out. Be sure to check out our blog in the description if you're interested in having us paint up some of your stuff. Yeah, we'll get started now. So basically the way I start off all my metals is with a mix of bolt gun metal, the old Citadel paint, mixed with some Chaos Black, and that just gives me a nice undercoat, base coat, basically of this dark metal that will sheen through all of my flat colors and my other metallic colors. It's similar to doing a dry brush. Here I'm just doing a quick base coat over the entire model of this bolt gun and Chaos Black mix. It's about a 1-to-1 ratio. So once I'm finished with this base coat, I'm going to go into my undercoat, basically of my main red tones. And for that I use about a 2-to-1 ratio of Necron red and Citadel scab red. And that's the base of my Necron color scheme, so if you're wondering why I'm not just doing something more red, it comes off a little maroon. And basically the point of this coat is just to really distinguish which areas are going to be red and where I'm going to want to get that nice gradient. So I focus on the edges of each hunk of metal, if you want to call it that, and then I sort of work the gradient towards the center, letting more air come out of my airbrush and less paint as I get towards the center where I want it to be sort of dark, in the middle of all of these pieces. This center part on the top of the cockpit is really where a lot of the attention is drawn to. So I wanted to get some really nice gradients going throughout this entire part. You can sort of see too, I may have watered down my paints a little bit too much. It's kind of funny watching it dry. But you can see as it goes on when I'm trying to do a heavier amount of that red on the edges, it comes off sort of wet looking. But it's better to have your paints, thinner than too thick, especially with an airbrush. And I sort of skipped ahead here just to show that, I did the same exact thing on the other side, and then I also did it underneath. So once I was done with my first base coat of that red, I move into a 1-to-1 ratio of blood red and Necron red. And this is what I'm going to use to really make those edges pop of all the metal parts, of all the red metal parts. You can see here I'm testing to see whether I like the blend or not. On the bottom, just because you're less likely to actually see that when the Night Scythe is on top of the table. So I sort of do a lot of my testing underneath the vehicle, and then if I like it, I work my way up to the top. But I got lucky enough to like how it looked immediately, so I didn't have to go back and change much. And keep in mind when you're doing these sort of blends, especially with an airbrush, you want to do it lighter and then, slowly, if you have an airbrush that allows you to really control it, then slowly let more paint out so that you're not, getting a really harsh blend, so you can start really soft and then add more. It's easier to add more than it obviously is to take away. So you can sort of see me doing that around all the edges here of the cockpit. Like I said, I really want this part to pop. I actually skipped showing me doing the exact same thing underneath because I figured you'd get the idea by what I did on the top. I just replicate that on the bottom. So next I go into the gold areas. My color scheme is this red and gold throughout my entire army. For my gold areas, I like to start a little darker than usual. So to get that color, I actually do a 2-to-1 mix of dwarf bronze with burnished gold, both Citadel paints, and then I actually add about 1 part of Vallejo model color whole red. and that gives me this really dark gold to start with, and then I can easily work my way up. So for this, I actually don't use my airbrush. I do dry brushing for this. The idea behind it is to still get that airbrush look, so I am going to be going for some nice smooth gradients with different shades of gold. But yeah, so this is just, you know, showing you that you don't have to have an airbrush in order to get that nice smooth sort of gradient, you know, color shift. So the next layer of this gold is actually going to be just dwarf bronze by itself. You know, all of these, you know, dry brushing highlights are really slight changes, but it's enough that you can really tell. So I like to start, you know, I'm going around the edges, and I like to leave some of that original color still showing. So I'm sort of working my way up each metal piece. I'm just trying to catch the edges really and the tips of each metal part. A good way to be sure that you're, you know, getting that smooth transition is to consciously be aware of how much pressure you're really putting down on the brush when you're dry brushing. So as you want more paint, obviously, you're pushing down a little bit harder, and then really let off, almost like you would with an airbrush, as you want to sort of smooth out and get less paint onto the model. So again, I'm just going to add a little bit of burnishing gold to that dwarf bronze to get a little bit more of a bright, you know, poppy gold. And I'm going to start working that into all of these areas. Again, now I'm going really light with the dry brush, really only on the edges and the tips. I'm still going to do a regular highlight, you know, freehand highlight around the sides, but really just let the dry brushing do the work for you. So I sort of sped through that section, but we're going to actually come back to the gold and do one more highlight at the end. But next, I'm going to actually go back to the red areas, and I'm going to do my first layer of highlighting. For this, I'm going to use blood red with a probably 2-to-1 ratio of blood red to fiery orange. And I'm going to be really careful going around all the edges of the Night Scythe here. I've got my paint, you know, fairly watered down, so that I can just do layers of this highlight instead of really caking on, you know, this muddy looking red. The other thing is, when you highlight red, you sort of have to decide whether you're going to go with an orange or an almost pinkish highlight, because obviously when you add white to red paints, they become sort of rosy and pink, but sometimes the orange almost pops too much. But in this case, because I did blood red highlights with the airbrush itself, you know, this is actually blending rather well. I'm sure some of you actually noticed already that I accidentally got some gold randomly on one of the wings on the right side. That was actually, unfortunately, I picked up, or I think I put my hand rather in some wet paint that was on my table, and then I picked up my model and didn't realize it. So I actually had to go back in the end and retouch that entire section, which was sort of frustrating, but if you can try and ignore it, please do. It bugged me the entire time, and now that I pointed it out, I'm sure it's all you're going to see. So after going around the model for the initial highlight with that red, I go back and I add a little more of the orange. You can sort of see it on my palette right there. And this one is very watered down. And here I'm just going over, you know, not every single area that I originally highlighted, but just areas that I feel would, you know, catch a little more light. So I'm just trying to get the edges to pop a little bit more so it almost feels like it's this glowing red coming off the Night Scythe. Now I couldn't decide what I wanted to do in those cracks and crevices around the entire model. So I actually did a test with green because all of my Gauss and Tesla weapons actually are the green scheme. But it really it looked like Christmas lights on a Christmas tree, except reversed. So I really didn't like it. So I ended up watering down that mix that I used for my highlights, and I did a really fine highlight inside those areas to make them almost look as if they were glowing. I was going to leave them just black, but it felt like it just left it untouched. Now's probably a good time to actually apologize for my poor camera angle and poor choice of putting it on the left side of me, being a lefty. When I was airbrushing it looked like it worked out well, but this was actually my first time making a video painting tutorial, so I apologize for that. Next, I'm going to address the areas that are neither red or gold, and for those I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to do a dry brush of bolt gun metal. Now here I'm going to do a Citadel chainmail highlight on top of all those bolt gun areas. Again, I'm just using the same simple dry brush techniques. And for these areas, you know, I'm doing a lot of the exposed metal, the guns, where the wiring goes into the metal. I'm going to end up going back and actually touching up these areas after I do a bad black wash. Whenever you do a wash of any kind, you want to be sure you let it sit and dry before you start to paint on top. So while that's happening, I'm actually going to go back to the gold areas with burnished gold with a tiny bit of dwarf bronze, watered down, and I'm going to do that nice fine edge highlight, sort of like I did with the red and orange mix. Now here I'm going to start my Gauss areas. I start with a base coat of Goblin Green, watered down. I'm going to go in and hit the orb, the Tesla areas, and anywhere I really think that, you know, Gauss would be coming out. My first layer of highlighting on the green areas is going to be with Citadel Scorpion Green. This is a really lime green. If you want it also, you could start to add some yellow to this mixture and do one more thin layer on top. Now to get that highlight to blend better, I'm going to do a Thraka green wash in all those areas to sort of blend those two colors together and really make, you know, a more dramatic looking green effect. When doing this wash, I like to focus on areas that the two initial greens meet to sort of get that nice blend and to get into the crevices where the green is. Next, I'm going to work on my actual glowing effect. So this is sort of doing some source lighting. I'm going to add some yellow to that scorpion green like I had talked about to get a really bright green. And for this I'm going to go in really light with my airbrush, which you can also sort of do dry brushing. I'm going to go into those areas around the Gauss to make it look like that glow is affecting the areas around it. since I had my airbrush out and had already cleaned it, I figured now would be a good time to go back and retouch that area that I had initially touched with gold by accident. So to do this, I did another blend of the blood red and the Necron red. I lost a little bit of the dark areas that I liked here, but I decided I did want to get that center line going through both of the wings to highlight because it looked a little dead. Just like before, I'm going to do a blood red and fiery orange highlight through those center lines now. Again, you want to make sure that when you're doing these highlights, your paint is highly watered down. Let's see if you noticed rookie mistake number 2. You can actually see my charge cord running through the top of my screen. Again, I apologize. This was my first time making a tutorial with my new camera. They can only get better from this. So, thanks for bearing with me and sticking through the entire tutorial. Here I actually decide to go back and add some Macarius Solar Orange, which is the old Citadel Foundation paint, to that highlight blend. It sort of gives it a little softer orange feel. I actually liked it and wish I had figured this out in the initial highlight stage. Now that I'm finishing up with the Night Scythe, I'm actually going to end up moving on to show you guys a really quick and dirty way to do cool basing. It doesn't just have to be for flying bases. I actually start with Adeptus Battle Gray as my base coat on my base. For my base, I just used some sand, a little bit of gravel, with some Elmer's glue spread around, and then I had primed it black. This is all being done with dry brushing, obviously. It's really easy and it looks really good. For the first highlight, I actually add some Citadel Foundation paint, Deneb Stone. This is sort of like a dark beige tan, and I just add that to the Adeptus Gray mix. I'm going to actually end up just doing 2 highlights of this. One is mixed Deneb Stone with the Adeptus Gray, and then I'll do one really light dry brush at the end with just Deneb Stone by itself. Well guys, that'll do it. So thanks again for watching. I hope you learned a little bit from this tutorial. And if you have any questions, really feel free to post them below and I will respond as soon as possible. Again, if you're interested in using our painting service, email us at everybitcountz@gmail.com. Or you can check out the blog to see our really cost-effective painting prices. So, alright guys, well, don't forget, every bit counts.